morning, everyone, and thank you for being here today for episode 3 of Beyond the Scope. We're here to discuss one of the most trending topics in the legal field, which is how we can use artificial intelligence in modern commercial courts. We have an outstanding panel and we have a very, very interested audience. So, to start off, let me begin by introducing our panel. To start off with, we have Dr. Jalal Al-Ahda. He is a partner at Bird and Bird in the Dispute Resolution Group in Paris. He is the head of the arbitration practice in France and a member of the dispute resolution practice in the UAE and Morocco. He acts as counsel, an arbitrator, and expert in various sectors such as construction and others. Dr. Jalal, thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Second of all, we have Dr. Nick Rudev, who heads the Middle Eastern technology practice of Linklaters LLP. Dr. Nick regularly advises on all technology law aspects of complex commercial and corporate transactions, including data, cybersecurity, digital payments, intellectual property, and telecommunications, with a focus on issues arising out of innovative and emerging technologies. Dr. Nick, lovely to see you, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
And last but not least, we have Dr. Najwa Araj, who is the Chief Researcher at the Cryptography Research Center and Autonomous Robotics Research Center at the Technology Innovation Institute. Dr. Najwa leads the research and development of cryptographic and quantum communication technologies, as well as the advancement of autonomous robotics and self-navigating vehicles. Dr. Najwa, thank you again for agreeing to be here. Sorry, Dr. Najwa, your microphone is on mute.
Sorry. Good morning, Aisha. Thank you for having me, and good morning, everyone.
All right. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So to start off with, Dr. Jalal, I just wanted to seek your views on what are the current trends in the AI field and seek your insights on what you've heard and what you've experienced so far.
Of course. Again, thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here speaking in the I wouldn't say artificial but virtual frame of the IFC, and to be also speaking alongside with Nick and Najwa to answer your question and go straight to the point. I do want to share with you some introductory remarks about what we're talking about and what would be the best way to do that than to give you a quote or perhaps a couple of recent statements. One of them is probably by one of the most well-known and wealthiest person I would say on Earth. It's Elon Musk. As early as in 2014, Elon Musk considered the threat of AI as, I quote, potentially more dangerous than nuclear bombs. Yet in 2015, he co-founded OpenAI with the goal, I quote, of advancing digital intelligence to the benefit of all humanity. And the same tension, which we will feel today, was conveyed back in March 2023 because he was leading a set of signatories of an open letter calling for a 6-month pause of the, I quote, out of control race to develop and deploy ever more powerful digital minds than no one, not even their creators, can understand. And yet, in July, Elon Musk incorporated a company called XAI. We are facing this contradiction with a lot of data, and let me give you a few. A very serious study by the Harvard Business Review recently found that on not on predictions, but on reality. Companies that have incorporated already AI saw an increase in lead generation, so revenue, by more than 50%, and a reduction of their overall cost by up to 60%. Very appealing, thus. Now, what are we talking about? We have already a text by the European Parliament and also by the OECD, which defines AI as a machine-based system that is designed to operate with varying levels of autonomy and that can, for explicit or implicit objectives, generate outputs such as predictions, recommendations, or even decisions that influence physical or virtual environments. A very broad definition, and that lawyers, they love definitions, and it's a rather encompassing definition. Now, I think the two ideas that perhaps one has to bear in mind is that AI is based on big data. It's the fundamental change. It is capable of absorbing an enormous amount of data. Second aspect is that this new generation of AI we're talking about, like typically ChatGPT, it is generative. What does it mean? It seems that simply that it can create new data based on the data that has been incorporated. It's the so-called self-learning system. Now, the issue we are facing is that it's evolving exponentially and faster than the regulators, and that's probably what we're going to be talking about, but also in terms of faster than their creators. Generative AI 1 was launched in 2018 with 117 million parameters. AI 3 was launched 3 years ago in June 2020 with 175 billion parameters. So you see the exponential evolution. There is indeed a lot of fears, especially by political representatives, about the so-called robot takeover. But if you look at beyond the Harvard Business Review study, at the actual fields where it is being implemented, there was a marvelous article from the New York Times a few months ago showing that for breast cancer, while statistics show that 20% of breast cancers were missed by a doctor, it was close to 1% for AI. And that's exactly why many people tend to rush to this hospital in Hungary where AI is implemented for any breast cancer surgery. So it's working, and it's on the ground already appealing. I won't talk about finance where it's being implemented is already for lending decisions, but we are seeing AI even in less expected areas which are so-called only to be generated by humans. That's true for film and movies. You may have heard about basically the new Indiana Jones movie, where an 80-year-old Harrison Ford can appear on screen in his 40s again, with a possibility to generate a franchise to continue without the need to physically replace the actor. In fashion and in music, and there is, you can Google this, but there is this song "Heart of My Sleeve," which is now competing, even though it was somehow generated by AI, to get some Grammy awards. I think one last statistic I wanted to mention before we get into the substance of the topic, and I will be done. It's another financial aspect. It is said that DeepMind's revenue, one AI company, tripled between 2019 from roughly 265 million pounds to 889 millions in 2021. And it is said that the infusion of AI across Microsoft's product portfolio represents, by serious studies, potential 100 billion incremental revenue by 2027. 100 billion revenue. Now, I have more to say to be practical and give you very concrete figures about those trends and what's going on. But those figures tend to give us a sense of what's happening, which is that it's overwhelming. Now the topic is about case management and how AI can be used in courts, but I'll leave the floor to my co-panelist on that.
Thank you so much for those insights, Dr. Jalal. I mean, it is certainly overwhelming. And when we are faced with such a big wave of change and development, and where investments are pouring in all around the world into this field, one does have to stop and ask oneself, what are the risks and what are the advantages from the use of using artificial intelligence into modern commercial courts that could justify their use? Dr. Nick, do you have anything you'd like to say on that?
Sure. Thank you very much. I mean, that was a very, very useful introduction, which I think has shown to everybody that there are a great many tangible commercial benefits from deploying AI. And of course, I mean, we'd like to, I suppose when one looks to history and to the introduction of every new piece of emerging technology, there's always been this moment of hesitation, this moment of fear. Is this kind of the end of an industry or the end of something? Abrupt change doesn't come easily. That's the very definition of abrupt change. But disruption, as we've learned in the past couple of decades, is actually good, and taken as a whole, after the pain is gone, could actually lead to positive restructuring and to things getting much better. I mean, just look at what cell phones or the internet has done for us today, and where we would be if we'd basically said no to it just because it was something too new and too scary. So all that's pointing to the many benefits of deploying artificial intelligence in the court system. And the way I think about deployment of emerging technologies, and in particular AI, into the court system is basically, to my mind, comprised of two elements, if you will. There's the decision, the substantive decision making, the judges, if you will, to put it very simply, and the decisions that they make, that basically applies the law and adjudicates disputes. And then there's the vast machinery of the courts, which plays an equally important function in supporting these judges in getting to the point of making a decision correctly. The whole process, what we call due process, the guarantee of due process, stems from an efficient support system for the courts. And I think it's useful to segregate and to think differently about the application of AI into the first and to the second element, because I think when you sort of think about the benefits and the potential drawbacks, the calculus looks very different in the two elements, and potentially it might be easier in a kind of a step-based approach to start with employing AI in the support element, and then move on at some point in the future into the second, to the substantive decision-making element. And I'm not going to again rehash all the benefits of automation, and I think AI. Another point to make here is that I think when we talk about artificial intelligence, we need something other than automation. Automation has been with us for decades now, and courts around the world, including the DFC courts, I think are leading and have been leading since their inception in the use of automation to facilitate processes. We've gotten comfortable with automation, and we've gotten comfortable with automation chiefly because we think of automation as being human driven, human supervised, human controlled. So effectively, automation is just a tool in the hands of a human being to augment their physical capabilities. So for example, if Aisha is able to process normally without the use of technology, let's say 10 cases a day, and to do the scheduling. With the use of technology, her abilities will be augmented, and she will be able to deal with tenfold the load, which is obviously good for everybody. But at all times, we think of her as being in control of what happens. The technology is just an extension. The challenge with AI is that it's not quite that. AI, by its very definition, takes a life of its own. Start has a mind of its own, so to speak, and although it may be supervised and operating within certain boundaries, at the end of the day, it is not something that you push a button and there's a deterministic outcome of it. It could do things on its own, and herein lies the problem. Since times immemorial, the court system, which has been the mainstay of all rule-based societies, has the one critical thing for it is that it has had to have public legitimacy. Courts, notoriously, as one American president said, don't really have the ability to send out armed men to enforce their judgments all the time. In civilized societies today, we rely on courts being legitimate, being perceived as legitimate by the general public, and that's where they derive their power. And perception is actually very important, because frequently there's a difference between perception and objective reality. We all live in an age of fake news and and artificially generated content that sometimes could be misleading. But this is particularly dangerous in a court. It's particularly dangerous in a court system to ever be in a situation in which the vast majority of the public has no faith that it's just, that it's fair, that it's unbiased, that it dispassionately applies the law equally to everybody in a just and fair way. Another element here is that in addition to it being legitimate, it needs to be fair. And fairness, again, is a subjective element. Fairness means that not only do I believe that the court reached the outcome and the decision which is right in the law, which is legal, but also that it's fair and just. Sometimes a decision could be legal, could be rationally the correct one, but it could strike people as extremely unfair and unjust. If too many of these accumulate, people start losing faith, and the justice system is just a very dangerous proposition. So I think these are these, to my mind, rise the main issues with deploying AI in the court system. Is that it has the ability, if it just wholesale deployed to replace judges, it has the ability to immediately undermine in a very serious way the perception of legitimacy, of fairness, of justice by people, because an AI brain, an artificial intelligence brain, is not a person, not an individual, which could be held accountable by anybody. If a judge gets things wrong consistently, the judge could be removed. If a judge acts maliciously or commits some kind of an improper action, the judge could be punished. AI is not subject to any of that. You cannot put AI in jail. You cannot fine it. You cannot disgrace it and defenestrate it. And yet it could lead to harm. Putting the hands of human beings, of businesses, of large businesses, into the hands of something that has no accountability, I think inherently raises in everybody an instinctive reaction of no, we're not ready for that. On the other hand, if we look at the second element, the support element of a court system, to my mind, that's where the benefits of AI could actually vastly outweigh the potential costs and risks. Of course, there are risks there as well, and the risks are sometimes very much the same as with the substantive decision making. Even the support side of a judiciary of the DFC courts, for example, make decisions on a daily basis that impact businesses, individuals in a major way, even if it's not about the outcome of their case. Just simple things like scheduling and granting exemptions, relief, procedural relief, and so on, can have massive consequences. So the risk is still there, but I do think that if appropriate safeguards are deployed, I think we're going to talk about the safeguards a little bit later on, those risks could be effectively controlled. Most importantly, because I think that the public perception could be much better managed on the non-substantive, on the procedural side of the court system than on the substantive side.
Thank you for that, Dr. Nick. I would love to hear more on how we can employ AI in the procedural matters. As we know, that's definitely what the registrar faces on a day-to-day basis. Dr. Najwa, just to pick your brains on the risks emanating from using AI in the courts, whether from the risk of generating incorrect information or from a cybersecurity perspective. Would you be able to shed some light on that?
Sure. Maybe from my side, I will talk more from the technology aspect and on the technical aspects of AI. So as my fellow panelists said before, there is a tremendous use or benefit for AI in the judicial and the commercial court system, whether we're talking about using AI systems, machine learning models for operational efficiency perspective, or whether we're talking about using those tools for investigative assistance, automated decision making, and the like. But obviously, the use of those machine learning models, today we hear a lot about natural language processing. Dr. Jalal shed light on all these large language models and how they evolved over the years. As much as they help with efficiency, as much as they help with advanced classification and decision making, they pose a very big challenge, and those challenges have to be addressed. So starting from the basic element such as pattern recognitions, to ethics, to bias decisions that can be taken by AI-based algorithms, moving into more complex topics such as transparency and accountability. So in most of these models and large language models and machine learning models, they are either self-learning algorithms, or what we see lately is that they, in addition to the self-learning and the training, they are augmented with reinforcement learning with human feedback. However, even with that, you can still train. The initial training of those models would be trained by certain data sets, either previous decisions that are relevant. If we're talking about facial images, video databases, patterns, etc., all of this prior data or the data that is being used for the training could contain bias. And this bias will propagate through this classification or through the decision making that is actually emanating from the AI model. And this leads to other risks, examples, privacy, data protection, even in the decision, and aspects related to non-discriminations and the others. Now, in addition to what I have mentioned before about the risk related to bias and the issues with the decision making and the bias and the training and the data set, you have the whole technological aspect of these large language models or these machine learning models or these AI tools that are being deployed. They are subject to cybersecurity attacks, but also to a new set of attacks. And this is not a problem that is peculiar to the judiciary systems or to commercial courts. This is a problem that needs to be addressed overall when it comes to the technological considerations and the wide deployment of those machine learning models. So today, starting from the basic things that we consider in any program when it comes to cybersecurity, vulnerability management, right? All of these models are being deployed. We're using ChatGPT, we're using GPT-4, etc. The code itself might have vulnerabilities that can be exploited, and all these CWEs that exist today, or the OWASP top 10, etc., can still apply, right? So this is more from a basic exploit or vulnerability exploits in the models themselves. Now, adding to that the complexity of AI, let's say the AI relevant attacks, such as poisoning attacks, where an attacker tries to corrupt a training data set maliciously and on purpose, attacks that are related to model extractions and model parameters extractions, adversarial attacks, evasion attacks, and the rest. So, despite all the usefulness and all the intelligence that is brought by those models, there are risks to be addressed from a technology perspective, from a cybersecurity perspective, from a data set perspective, that there's a lot of work that is going on, but also there's a lot of work that needs to be invested by the technical and the cybersecurity community.
Many thanks for that, Dr. Najwa. Certainly some items that were not necessarily taken to perspective. Dr. Jalal, I think you may have something you'd like to say on that.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Good evening.
Okay, wonderful. I just wanted to add a few elements about what we were talking about, and I will continue with concrete illustrations and figures and surveys if you want. I totally agree with the sort of very fine line between the substance and the decision-making process to which case management relates. And I think there is this tension which I mentioned between leveraging AI as an assistance-based tool to enhance efficiency and accuracy. That's what case management is about. And on the other side, safeguarding fairness and due process in the outcome of that process, precisely. And that's what we're talking about, making sure that the path leading to the outcome is helps in terms of cost efficiency and time efficiency, but secures also the outcome so that it is fair. And that tension, we saw it in the advantages and downsides of AI. But what is case management? So again, we love definitions in as lawyers. So I looked at that and I realized that we didn't have a lot of authorities precisely on that term that is very commonly used. But do we know exactly what it is about? I did find a source which I'm happy to share with you. It's the UOLLB First Class Law Notes, so probably from a law school. And it defines case management as the process through which the court or arbitral tribunal, an arbitral tribunal and the parties, both, it's not just the court, control the dispute resolution process by the application of specific rules to ensure their efficient and effective progression through the legal system. It involves organizing and coordinating various aspects of the case, including procedural timetable, evidence disclosure, and court appearances, thus hearings. So with that, I think we have a pretty good idea of what it entails. And by the way, case management is well known within the DIFC court because it's covered by Part 26 of the DIFC court's rules. We have also what we call the case management pre-hearing conference in many arbitration rules. And to be concrete, what are we talking about? It was alluded to in the definition. We're talking about translations, timelines, case management conferences, document production, and probably to some extent managing witness statements and written submissions. So it's really about preparing the case. And the issue is that it is always difficult to draw the line between, if you want, the envelope, the procedure, and the content of the envelope, the letter, if you want, which is the substance of a dispute. And that's, for example, a question having to do with bias, as we just heard from Nick and Najwa. It's interesting to mention that it's already there. Let me give you a few examples. In Argentina, public prosecutors are already using an AI software that is that it gives them, it's called Prometa, and it gives them some prediction about the outcome of their prosecutions. And they say it's reliable by 96%. In Singapore, you have real-time translations in courts, in hearings, sorry. You have another software that is being used called, I think, Victor in Brazil to conduct preliminary case analysis. In Austria, AI is used for document management, anonymization of court documents. And Zoom has created an assistant for Zoom calls, like the one we're having today, completely governed by artificial intelligence. I could give you many other examples, especially by chatbots created by law firms to assist not just their clients, not just their associates, but even more fundamental aspects. And those basically issues lead me to a very concrete example of a case probably many of you have heard of, which is the Mata versus Avianca case. And here we are at the crossroad between case management and substance. This is a man called Mata who sued an airline company where he said he was injured when a metal serving cart struck his knee during a flight. The lawyers sued based on a 10-page brief the company and relied on a certain number of decisions which no one, not even the judge himself, could find when looking at the code quotations. This was because ChatGPT had invented all of the cases. And the lawyer, with 3 decades of experience, said he was regretting and relying on ChatGPT in good faith. He was not basically followed by the court, who fined him for $5,000 and said he was acting in bad faith because of an act of conscious avoidance and false misleading statement to the court. So you see, gathering authorities, it may be just a mere case management issue, but it can lead to an impact on the outcome. But he did say that he was acting in good faith. One, it's not very convincing simply by saying, well, I did ask ChatGPT whether those cases existed, and ChatGPT told me yes, they existed, which is again not very convincing. But the other, I think, argument, which we will all be faced with, is the following statement he made. He said, "We made a good faith mistake in failing to believe that a piece of technology could be making up cases out of whole cloth." And this is something that looks like a good faith argument. I believe that that's exactly like Nick just said. We will be faced with this dilemma of trying to seek for efficiency while at the same time avoiding some big errors, especially what is virtual reality and actually false reality, i.e. relying on cases that do not exist, for instance.
Certainly an interesting point, and one we should be keeping our eye out on. So, Dr. Nick, given everything that we've heard on the risks and the advantages, and going back to a point that you had raised, a simple question: should we be employing robots as judges, for example? And if we do decide to employ AI, specifically in this court and other courts around the world, the word you used was safeguards. What are the safeguards that we should be looking at to mitigate the risks that we've just discussed today?
Well, if you're looking for a simple answer, my simple answer would be, for all the reasons that Joel just eloquently adduced, no, we should not be using AI for judges. even though I'm a firm believer in AI and in emerging technology, and I'm a convert, I readily confess to that. Even somebody like me, my faith in the justice system that's basically driven by artificial minds without human supervision would be very, very shaken. That said, I do think, I fervently believe that we should use AI in the court system, and the best place to use AI, again for all the reasons that Jalal so eloquently adduced, is probably on the support side of things. So, to put it figuratively, we shouldn't put an AI brain in the judge's chair, but we should employ AI to aid the judge. And for example, I was listening to the examples that come from the Brazilian and Argentinian court system. That they're very interesting. What comes to mind is an example that comes from the American court system, and American courts have already turned their minds to this. Actually, ChatGPT is now used openly in American courtrooms, and that's okay. In fact, the general stance, so far as I could tell, of the American courts, although there's variations, is that it's okay to use ChatGPT, so long as whatever ChatGPT produces for you is thoroughly checked and verified and basically controlled by a human, much in the same way that, for example, a judge would use a clerk. So you go out there and you do the research for me. Maybe you take the first crack at the judgment, something that judicial clerks across the United States do all the time. And then the judge, of course, takes this on, double checks everything, sees that he actually agrees with the writing, with the wording of it, because that'll become the law, and then that's issued. So in many ways, employing AI in this context would not be, it will be revolutionary in the sense that you're replacing a living assistant with an artificial intelligence assistant, but that's already happened in many spheres. Again, as was discussed in banks. Now, more often than not, when you chat with somebody on the bank's website, it's artificial intelligence, it's not a human being. So there's nothing too worrisome about that. The problem is that whenever you use AI at this stage of AI and at this stage of regulation and at this stage of our understanding, it has to be used in a purely supportive capacity with heavy human oversight. Because as one American judge in Texas has said, the big problem with AI, he said, is that it's prone to hallucinations, and that's exactly the example Jalal gave of making things up. Anybody who's, and I'm sure most of us, obviously with interest in AI, we've used ChatGPT, so we've seen how it works. It produces something that looks and sounds 100% very authoritative and convincing, and it's usually 90, 95, 97, 98% right. But the problem is the insidious 1, 2, 5% that's wrong sound just like the rest of it that's right, and so it's very, very deceptive. So the safeguards. So if we were to say we deploy AI in a support capacity in the court system, where it can lead to great efficiencies at smaller risk, what are the safeguards? And I think you Aisha, you mentioned one of them, and that's the kind of the human oversight. The other safeguards we can employ, which should be designed to address the problems with AI. And again, I believe that the problems with AI are not so much substantive as they are ones of perception, or at least the principal problems. How do we assuage the perception that the fate of businesses and humans is put in the hands of machines? Well, we say, first of all, it's not going to be a black box. So one fundamental safeguard is everybody needs to be able to understand how this AI that works in the court functions, much in the same way as everybody is able to sort of judge the qualifications of employees of a court system, or the qualifications of judges, if you will. So there needs to be transparency, the principle of transparency. You cannot have something. I recently had a client that was considering deploying a piece of artificial intelligence and for work in the DFC, and when I asked them, well, do you understand? Does the supplier tell you how it works? And they said, well, no, we don't. We've never asked, and they told us they will never tell us because they don't understand either. So we cannot have a situation like that. There needs to be transparency. That's principle one. Principle two, it needs to be designed in an appropriate way to be ethical and unbiased and fair. Again, in a court system, more so than, for example, in a bank context, fairness, the AI being certifiably fair, ethical, and unbiased is crucial to maintain the legitimacy of the court. So there needs to be probably some kind of a certification mechanism that can, somebody, and Nigel probably has better views on that, and because it touches a bit more on the technical side of things. But we need to have, just as we have certification mechanisms for aircraft, so that we know we fly an aircraft that's not going to fall down out of the skies, and certification mechanism for example, security of IT systems, so that we know the money that we put in a bank is not going to disappear tomorrow, at least not very easily. Similarly, we need to have certification for AI that tells us that its algorithm, it has designed it and puts it within its operation within parameters that ensures, or at least does all that's possible to ensure that its operation is unbiased, fair, and ethical. And thirdly, but not last, I would say there needs to be accountability, and that's the big one. And I think that's the when you ask people, frequently when I deliver talks like this, and one of the questions I ask the audience is, well, and I think that was brought up also at some point. Well, imagine a situation where there needs to be some kind of complicated surgery performed on you. Would you prefer a human surgeon or an AI surgeon? Interestingly, the vast majority of people say a human. And I say, well, wait a minute. Humans make mistakes. AI presumably makes no mistake. Why? And I think the best as I can understand from many conversations and following conversations, that is because there's this visceral, instinctive feeling that if a human being is doing something on you, there's accountability. If the surgeon gets it wrong, first of all, you don't think the surgeon would intentionally get it wrong. They will do all they can to get it. But even if they get it wrong, there will be consequences. If an AI surgeon kills you on the table, or amputates the wrong leg, who is going to be held accountable for that? So similarly, in a court system, there needs to be accountability of some kind. That's a tough one, because I'm yet to see a convincing solution of how to design accountability that will be palatable to the general public, that will, in the same way that humans have accountability because they're prone to penalties, imprisonment, disgrace, reputational damage, and so on, none of which works on the AI. Because again, we have to remember the justice system, people look to the justice system for a fair outcome, they look for it for retribution as well in context. So whenever I feel wronged, I feel harmed, I need to see that the party is justly punished. In this case, where potentially we're talking about AI, it's very hard to think of that. I mean, there's various solutions: accountability for the designer. There's various solutions: accountability for the entity that's using the AI, and in recent regulation in the DFC that was passed on the use of AI for personal data processing, for example. This is actually the avenue that's taken to ensure accountability, is to impute it, to basically saddle the entity deploying AI with accountability for its actions, which some say, oh, it's not very fair, but it's one approach.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Nick. Moving on from the risks and the benefits and the advantages and what we should be keeping into consideration, looking to the future, Dr. Najwa, are you able to shed any light on the regulatory and the compliance frameworks that are needed in the future before we start looking at introducing these tools into court systems?
Sure. So I think this is a very nice transition to what Dr. Nick was saying, right? So regardless of, let's say, the vertical or the place where those AI systems are being deployed, there are certain standards, there are certain, let's say, compliance frameworks that need to be put together. So I would split these into the pure AI standards and frameworks. Then you have hand in hand goes the a framework or a legal framework related to data privacy. And this is something, federated learning, data privacy is something very important as we start adopting AI tools and AI systems. more and more across industries and in particular in the commercial systems. So today there are multiple efforts that are going on the standardization and on putting standards on AI systems. One of them is the ISO efforts that are happening as part of the SC42 and its various working groups. So what you see there, they're doing. This is a major effort that is happening to put foundational standards, to put standards for the quality of data, the quality of the testing data, how to reduce bias, how to curate the data that is being used as training data sets, how to reduce hallucination, and then putting some of the KPIs that need to be measured out of those models. There are standards that are being put that are related to trustworthiness and robustness, and this is something that's very important. At the end, as we use those AI models and machine learning models today, we treat them as black boxes. So the more we introduce ways in order to provide robustness measures and trustworthiness measures of those AI, this will enable adoption, and this will enable more and more trust in the outcome of these AI models. Some standards are happening or basically are being put on the computational approaches and the computational characteristics of the AI systems, and in fact also related to the use cases and the applications and how to deploy them as part of a whole data framework in organizations. A lot of those standards are being worked out today, so there are no certifications related to them as of yet. But these are being worked out, and then eventually they will go into the certification path, and the UAE is a major member that is contributing to those standards as well. Now, on the other side, you have the aspects of data privacy and data security, and also the security of the AI systems as well, and identifying the new type of attacks in addition to the traditional cyber attacks, exploits, etc. that can happen. I mentioned some of them before related to poisoning, adversarial attacks, etc. On the privacy aspects, you have coordinated efforts that are coming from NIST, from FIPS, that talk about privacy-preserving technologies, and there you see a whole lot of, let's say, work that is happening on the information security and cryptography communities when it comes to how do I ensure privacy-preserving machine learning. For federated data sharing, for federated data learning, introducing concepts such as homomorphic encryption for data processing and data storage, concepts such as secret sharing, and concepts such as basically oblivious neural networks for privacy preserving. These also are being put in terms of standards and FIPS standards that the systems that will be deploying AI and then introducing those privacy preserving measures have to be compliant to. And the same way that you have today the basically certifications that are related to MVPs and VLabs and FIPS certifications, this data privacy and privacy preserving technologies will have the same thing. So this is more on the technology and all these standard institutions efforts that are happening, the ISO groups efforts that are happening, and of course there will have to be a legal framework that is local, that adapts to those, that adapts them on a local level, and then relate them to what exists today in terms of information assurance standards that already exist in the country, data privacy law that exists in the country, e-commerce and e-systems law that already exist, in order to come up with this framework that will be relevant to the deployment of those systems in the courts and other verticals.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Najwa. So we are nearing the end of our discussion, and before we move on to the Q&A, I would like to hear from Dr. Jalal and Dr. Nick on what the future looks like in terms of regulation. Are we looking at heavy regulation, light regulation? Is there anything more that we should be on the lookout for in terms of regulation? Would you like to go ahead, Dr. Jalal?
Can you hear me? Wonderful. Yes, a few points on regulation. Although I may overlap a little bit with what we just said, I won't go through the reason why we need regulation because it was covered very clearly, both in terms of principle and technically by Nick and Najwa. Hallucinations, what we call jailbreaks, we did mention bias. There are issues of so-called black boxes, the quality and the representativeness of the underlying data. And there's a question of how we reach a certain decision if we use AI for the decision making beyond simple case management assistance. And that's going to be fundamentally the transparency challenge, probably the biggest one, because I just spoke a few weeks ago with a good friend of mine who has been just hired to do artificial intelligence with a big tech company known by everyone, which I won't quote. And we were talking about artificial intelligence, which is his daily job. And he was admitting, you know what, we're doing this, all these algorithms, very complicated, etc. And it works. I mean, it's very reliable in terms of mistakes. But you know what? We don't know how, and we don't know why it works. And this why question is really something, technically speaking, we will have to face. Now, to face and cope with those challenges, we see some trends in terms of regulation, led as usual by the EU and the US. Both do not have currently any regulation. You do have some, as mentioned just a few minutes ago by Najwa, some issues or aspects concerning algorithmic decision making by the GPDR regulation. But you don't have much. I can tell you, before going to the broader regulation in the US and the EU, that as far as arbitration is concerned, it is quite interesting to see that if you look at the international level, especially the New York Convention, which is probably the most liberal and one of the most popular treaties beyond arbitration ratified by states, there's nothing that prevents an AI from rendering an award, nothing per se. Same for the unilateral model law. But if you look at local regulation, especially, for example, French arbitration law, which I know a bit better than others, it is imposed first that a physical person renders the decision. And it's usually applicable to judges and decision making, but for some reasons there are, we believe that it should apply to arbitrators as well. And it's really interesting to see that today profiling judges is impossible, but it is possible in the selection of arbitrators, which is one of the big advantages of arbitration. And to finish on arbitration related regulation of AI, it's important to know that the Silicon Valley Arbitration Center has guidelines on the use of AI and has launched a survey to even deepen those guidelines. Now, on EU and US regulation, I just wanted to say that there is a CEPEG European Ethical Charter together with some what we call the AI Act that is being in the process of being adopted with a few principles: respect for fundamental rights, non-discrimination, quality and security, transparency, impartiality and fairness, and user control. So those 5 principles have been guiding those regulations. In Singapore, just know that there's a model law that is based on accountability and guidance, a little bit like what we just heard from Nick and and Najwa. And in the US, there is the US Department of Commerce National Institute of Standards and Technology, the NIST, which has released its artificial intelligence risk management framework. So you see, it's just like soft law or law in preparation that is not yet good law, but it is already in the process of being good law. A few cases, especially the Texas judge Nick mentioned and Canadian court, have released some very specific guidance in terms of how parties should be using AI, but not more than that. And speaking about the future, if you allow me, and I'll finish on that, I just wanted to quote Antoine Garapon, who said, "A person alone or a machine alone will never be as effective as a person and a machine together." And it is a reality. And I took the liberty to ask the same question that is posed today for this webinar to ChatGPT. And please allow me to read the answer, because I want to quote and I want to disclose that I used ChatGPT. Can you hear me? Okay. So you will see the nuance, the typical nuance answer by ChatGPT. While AI undoubtedly offers a significant advantages in terms of efficiency, accuracy, and cost effectiveness, things that we have heard today, it is essential to proceed with caution. The human element in legal proceedings, such as judgment, empathy, and nuanced decision-making, cannot be replaced by machines. Furthermore, typically structured answer by ChatGPT, the accelerated use of AI in court systems and arbitration must be accompanied by robust, ethical, and legal frameworks to ensure transparency, fairness, and accountability. Again, notions we've heard today. It is crucial to address concerns related to bias, privacy, and data security, as well as to establish clear guidelines for human oversight and intervention when necessary. Incorporating AI into modern commercial courts and arbitration has the potential to revolutionize the legal industry, making it more accessible and efficient for all parties involved. However, striking the right balance between automation and human expertise is key to harnessing AI's full potential while preserving the integrity of the legal system. I end the quote and I end my intervention. Thank you.
Maybe I'll just add. I mean, it's I probably that's a very good way to just end our trilogue. But because ChatGPT, I think said it better than all of us combined. I would just say that as a kind of a reminder, I'm sure many of you will be aware that the DFC actually we hold the distinction of being the probably, if not the first jurisdiction, so far as I was able to tell, probably one of the first in the world to enact actual rules that are specific to the use of artificial intelligence in the processing of personal data. As Jalal said, there's many jurisdictions around the world, the EU most notably quoted with the EU Act. They're in the process of putting together pieces of AI regulation that are at various stages of their legislative process. But as he also mentioned, most of these are sort of bogged down. The EU Act probably is not going to be good law anytime soon, judging by the increasing disputes between the EU institutions, and there's going to be a new parliament next year, and so on. But the general trend is there, and the answer to the question, will there be regulation in AI? The answer is yes, absolutely. And as the use of AI intensifies, regulation will intensify. And actually, regulators have become really good lately in this kind of instant reaction or quick reaction to problems with quick regulation. I think the there's something to be said about the financial crisis in 2008 that sort of taught regulators that maybe if we want to avoid problems, we just need to act faster. And I'm certainly very happy to see that in the DFC that was the case. And unlike other countries which have various in the region, which have various kinds of non-binding principles and guidelines and so on, actually here in this jurisdiction we have good law specifically on that. I'm also a firm believer that there's a reason why, for example, the EU Act has been so controversial and so difficult to move forward, and has uncovered so many disagreements and kind of conflicting viewpoints. And that is because it's trying to probably accomplish too much. I wonder if the better approach to regulating AI is not to regulate AI itself, but to regulate users of AI in particular verticals and industries, and in cases where we feel the risks from the use of AI are the most severe. Data protection processing is one example of that. It's an area where we deeply care and we're deeply troubled by the use of AI. The use of AI in government institutions that make decisions about people, whether that be the courts, ministries, and so on, could be another very, very good case, a good public problem that calls for specific regulation, banks with credits and so on and so forth. But trying to have a regulation of AI as AI is a little bit, strike me as a little bit like trying to have a regulation of computers. If you want to have something that everybody will agree on, it's going to be so high level and so generic that it's going to be meaningless. And if you try to get down into the nitty gritty, well, then it depends on what you use the computer for. The AI, to my mind, is similar to a computer. It's a tool that you can deploy and use in different cases. And really, what you should be worried about is regulating its use in particular cases.
Many thanks for that, Dr. Nick. Apologies for earlier speaking on machines being somewhat unreliable. I was unable to unmute my microphone. So thank you very much, Dr. Nick, Dr. Jalal, and Dr. Najwa. Very insightful discussion today. We have questions coming in, so I'm just going to go ahead and read the first few. So from Hamad, he's asked, do you believe that an AI specialized in legal matters, which is under the DIFC court's example, for example, would lower the mistakes and make it more reliable? Does anyone, would anyone like to answer that?
So maybe I can answer this from a technology perspective, and very shortly today we see lots of large language models coming in. We had before NLP models, etc., and all of these are trained on generic data. So there is something that is being done, is called fine-tuning, where you can take an existing model and fine-tune it and specialize it for a specific domain. And this is something that can happen for legal matters, for specific decisions, specific classifications that you need for those legal matters, and fine-tune the parameters of the model to be specialized for that. But that does not mean that you will get rid of all the problems of hallucination, bias, etc., because this will still depend on the quality of the input data that being provided, and if you have reinforcement learning using human feedback, it will still depend on this human feedback that is being provided in order to fine-tune the model. Makes it better for sure. However, this is not something that can get rid of all those issues and related to the problems of those AI in the legal cases.
Thank you very much, Dr. Najwa. Another question has come in from our Chief Registrar, Amna Airways. Since humans are the ones that input the data and humans can be biased, how can we ascertain that the AI output is not biased? Are there tools to avoid such biases?
Maybe I could take this one. It's a great question. It kind of goes back to the example that I gave about the surgeon. Do you want to be operated by a human or an AI? We humans are not infallible. In fact, we make mistakes all the time, and we humans are very prone to biases. Just look at racial discrimination and so on. So the very sensible question is, if we are fallible ourselves, if we're faulty, how can we be trusted to supervise a system effectively that actually could function better than us? I think the answer is it's all about perceptions. Objectively speaking, it could be that we humans make more mistakes than AI, and objectively speaking, it could be that we actually cannot reason as fast, as quick, as efficiently, as accurately as AI, and we could even have deeper biases than AI. But I think the general perception of human beings is that they trust other human beings, particularly in a professional setting, for example, such as in the courts, to set aside their personal biases. In my personal life, I could have all kinds of beliefs, and people, as the registrar and everybody who's sitting on the courts, I'm sure very, very accustomed to this. They become a different person when they sit on the bench and when they have to make decisions. And the perception that you have a human being that is double checking the ability of AI to be unbiased and acting as a check would be enormously beneficial to maintaining the legitimacy of the courts. Now, from a technical perspective, can a human even know technically that AI has become biased? I think the answer is, and I think Najwa talked about this, and the quality of the data. Actually, really what you're supervising is not so much the operation of the AI, because there's little, unless you're a really good real-time statistician, you can't know if there's bias in the output. But if we can control the data that's fed into it, and if we can safeguard that data from poisoning and bias, then actually we can pretty much guarantee that the output is going to be as unbiased as possible. It's similar to a human being going through an educational process, right? How biased you are depends on where you are raised, by your family, your environment in which you grew up, the schools that you went to, the university that which you studied at. And so similarly for AI, we just need to control that entire initial process that trains it, that makes it, develops it into something.
Dr. Jalal, anything you'd like to say? There you go. Go ahead.
Just checking if you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. A very good question, which prompts two sorts of not answers, but perhaps further questions. One is, yes, how to fight against bias in the first place. I think we're having some difficulties, but there are techniques. I work a lot for my firm and beyond in the field of D&I, diversity and inclusion, and there is a lot of neuroscience studies on that. And one very simple element to fight against bias is to be conscious about being biased. And this is something that people tend to deny when then being asked, are you completely impartial, except they can't accept that their educational background, etc., would lead them to take some biased positions, however neutral and in good faith they want to be. And simply, again, this awareness is important. Now, if you implement this into the field of AI, if you do not teach, but you enter parameters for the machine to stop at a certain level, and that can be done through a software. It is a way to do it. Now, does it work? I can't tell you. I'm just saying, prima facie, it may help, and that a little bit echoes what Nick just mentioned. Now, the other thing, it leads me to the prior question about point we mentioned about regulation. I wonder to what extent regulators who are currently working on controlling AI and the use of AI, etc., will not rely on AI to regulate. And that would be a funny thing, which is We talk sometimes in arbitration about auto-regulation. Well, that would be auto-regulation. I don't know to what extent AI can regulate itself, but what is fundamental is that you can always keep possibility to press a finger either to stop or to take back control. And to take back control, you need to understand all the parameters. And again, this is probably the biggest challenge.
Many thanks for that comprehensive answer, Dr. Jalal. Another question has come in. So, how can we protect data privacy from the use of AI? Dr. Najwa, perhaps you'd like to touch on that?
Yes. So let me take this question in two ways. One is you have the cases where you have the AI models that are being deployed on premise. So basically, you will be having your data being processed by your AI model or the AI system that is on premise. In this case, since you have everything on your within your local environment, you would use the classical data encryption methodologies, database protection, etc., and then you process it through the AI model. Now, the more complicated case is that or the two complicated cases come in when you are using a centralized a machine learning model or LLM that you want to send your private data in order to process it, in order to basically provide you with a specific decision or classification from that model itself. And in this case, there are few privacy preserving technologies that I was talking about before, and the most relevant one would be either something called multi-party computation, where you would actually share your data or shard your data across multiple servers, and then the collection will happen in a private way at the central node. And there is another thing that is called fully homomorphic encryption, which is still not as mature and not as efficient as a technology, but this is a way to solve this problem. Then you have the case where you would have, let's say, multiple entities, and then they want to share either the models, or they want to share the learning of the models or the weight of the models. And this is what we call the federated learning. So either you want to share the model that you trained with your local data, and then you want to aggregate those models in one model that they can benefit from the learning that happened on the data of entity 1, entity 2, entity 3, and etc. And this would be a combination of what we call the privacy PPML, or privacy preserving machine learning, in addition to what I mentioned before related to multi-party computation, and then splitting parameters over multiple nodes, so that none of them will have the complete picture, and then you keep it private anyway.
Very interesting. Thank you for that, Dr. Najwa. So another question has come in on why is there a delay in using AI right away? Is there anything that needs to be done before courts can begin using AI in judgments? Dr. Nick, perhaps?
I think again the use of AI in judgments and the use of AI on the substantive side of decision making in the courts is probably still many years away. Probably we're from the point where there will be enough public trust built and faith into the working of AI built to the point where we would comfortably be able to say this case was adjudicated wholly by AI. And again, I think it's not so much because it's going to take us years to get to the point where, objectively speaking, AI will be able to make these decisions and to act in that capacity. So much as it will take a long time. I mean, probably AI, the way we have it as technology, is very, very close to that. And in fact, AI in most cases is more accurate than humans. but it'll take a much longer time than getting it objectively there, to building the public's confidence in it to the point where we are comfortable putting it there. Again, going back to the fact that the court system, from times immemorial, has rested, its authority has rested on public perceptions of legitimacy, fairness, and justice. We need to build that with respect to AI if we're to use it in that system in such an important context. So I think that causes the lag, and that's the holdup, if you will. Is not so much that we technically can't design it, as that society is just not ready to accept it yet, and it's not something that could be forced on people. I mean, I suppose you could force it. You could sign a law that says from tomorrow on, we have an AI judge, and people will be forced to accept it. But there's a difference between people having to live with something that they don't trust and they don't like because the law says so, which is a disastrous situation, and a situation where people actually trust, have faith, and are comfortable with something, perceive it as fair, balanced, unbiased, and so on, which is the outcome that we need. And it's just going to take time for people to get used to it.
Thank you for that. That's something definitely we should be taking into consideration, and looking to see what we can implement straight away and what we can look into implementing in the future. My final question is one that has come in offline. So we have spoken a lot about using AI from a court's perspective, case management perspective. We even touched upon using AI in submitting court documents or making pleadings and providing submissions in an ongoing case. Would there be any ethical considerations to take in mind? Or let's put it this way, ethical sort of, I won't use the word punishments, but in the event that this wasn't disclosed and there wasn't any transparency, which are the principles that we spoke about, how would we as a court be able to counteract that? Dr. Jalal, if you have anything to say on that.
It seems to me it's a very challenging question. It is, like what, to buckle up the buckle. When we started and we covered all the fields where AI is conquering, including those human creation related, where we did not expect AI to enter. Music, movies, etc., and even literature, actually a book, all these things. And it makes me think that AI can actually do everything, including learn, because we're talking about, again, machines that are learning themselves. We can make sure that it learns, or do our best that the machine learns how to be ethical. And I'm saying this because I am optimistic in general. I do believe in the benefits of science, and I rely on two very simple ideas. One comes from the fact that I often read one newspaper which I like among others. To make sure I'm not biased, I take up one from the US, one from Europe, and one from Asia, in different languages, so that the perspectives are different. In the US, it's the New York Times, and there is this ethical editor who writes very funny, intriguing articles about what you should be doing when the father of the wife of your daughter, of your son has financial issues, should you intermingle, etc. So there are advice about what should be done and what should not be done, generally speaking, not according to a culture, but there is this idea that sometimes this is the right thing to do. And I think ethically, there are things that we can universally agreed upon. You remember we talked about bias, and I do feel that there is a way to transform into
Dr. Jalal,
Can
are
you
you
hear me?
still with us? Yes, your camera has gone
Can you
off.
hear me? Yes.
We can hear you.
I was saying that I believe there are ways to transform those ethical considerations, parameters, into some equations that the machine will have to take into account and to contain and basically reach a fair result. That's one. And the second aspect is that ethics and in general, those human considerations, we talked about empathy and this need of human justice. This is something that anyway will require a human element at some point in the process, and perhaps at many points in the process. So to safeguard those ethical considerations, I think that the human aspect must be there one way or another, meaning you cannot automate everything anyway.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Jalal. This brings us to the end of our session today. An enlightening discussion with an expert panel, a lot to think about, a lot to consider, specifically for the DIFC courts and how we can implement AI tools into our existing system, and hopefully the word would spread to other court systems worldwide. Thank you to everyone who appeared here today. We will be sharing a recording of this session on our YouTube channels. And thank you once again to our expert panelists for being here today and for sharing your expertise and your insight. From the DIFC courts and from the legal community, thank you very much.